nerds, you are not going to regret tuning in today because today I have an internationally recognized meat lipid scientist, Dr. Payam Vahmani. Hi, Payam. I'm so honored to have you on the show.
Thank you, Desi. I'm great for the opportunity to be here and talking to you about meat, fat, and lipids. So thank you for
Yeah,
having me
and
on.
it's so important because we're going to talk about how it impacts flavor and
Hmm.
also how it impacts what you feed. And we sent out a survey for people to send in questions, and we had great response to those
Great.
questions. So I'm going to start right off the bat with a question, and it is, how many types of fatty acids are there? And are there different levels?
Yeah, that's a great question, Desi. It's like when it comes to like ruminant animals like beef, like cattle, sheep, goats, they have ruminants have the most complex fatty acid profile among all fat sources that we have out there. You can find up to 400 different fatty acids in ruminant fat. In theory, we can detect at least 120 of them when we analyze samples with the methods that we have. Like if you compare, like for example, beef fat to pork you can detect like up to 20, 25 different fatty acids, whereas in pork, whereas in beef you can detect 120 different fatty acids. And again, that goes back to the digestive system of the ruminant animals. Like in beef cattle, we have the rumen microbes. They transform the fat or the lipids that come from diet to a wide range of intermediates in the rumen. And microbes in the rumen make their own fats, and they can get digested and absorbed and then get into the bloodstream and go deposit in the tissues, in meat and fat. That's how you get a very complex fatty acid profile. They contribute to the nutritional quality of the animal, like the product, and also the flavor profile. So it has a very diverse fatty acid profile when it comes to beef. And another thing we should keep in mind, like fat is the nutrient in meat that is the most responsive to dietary changes. So it's hard to change the protein content or amino acids or vitamins, minerals in meat, but fat is can be easily manipulated in terms of how much fat deposited in the meat, in the muscle, like in the form of marbling fat, but also its composition. What type of fatty acids out there is the most responsive to dietary changes. So that's why I'm so interested in fat, because I can, play with the diet and we can analyze the product and see the response. So it's
I'm
very amazing to see how it responds to the diet.
and I can't wait to tell our listeners how the diet impacts the fat because they're
Hmm.
very interested in that because with Angus or Wagyu beef, the flavor profile and comes from the fatty acids, and
Yes.
so we're going to tell you everything that Payam has discovered, and also from reading other research from Japan. So you want to stay tuned and don't go away. So the next question I had was, is there a key that turns these fatty acids on, and more so in some animals than other? I guess what they're trying to find out is if Wagyu has a key that is more significant to have a better flavor profile than say other beef breeds.
Yeah, when it comes to the factors that impact the fat composition or fatty acid profile, there are two main factors. It's genetics and diet. Um, well, from my experience, I would say is 60% genetic, 40% diet. So you
Okay.
have to have the right genetic. Like when it comes to Wagyu, they have They have a different genetic profile. They have different expression of the enzymes that are involved in fat synthesis. Like in when it comes to Wagyu, they have a high in the Wagyu beef. They have more activity of the enzyme called delta 9 desaturase. It converts saturated fats to monounsaturated fats. So it generates more oleic acid. Oleic acid is the main fatty acid you find in olive oil. It's a heart healthy fatty acid. It plays a big role in flavor. It gives you that pleasant, buttery, smooth flavor. It gives you a nice mouthfeel, and that's one of the big characteristics of that genetic of the Wagyu that has higher abundance of that enzyme in the tissues. So that's that 60% part of that 60% I talked about. So another part of it, of course, diet. So the type of forage, type of grain, the forage to grain ratio in the diet, and the time on feed, how long you have the animals on a high grain diet when you finish them. So feeding high grain diet for long time increases the activity of that enzyme, delta 9 desaturase. So it leads to more oleic acid in the final product and leads to a better flavor in general, and also a healthier fat, because when you have a beef fat with more oleic acid, it can, when consumers consume that, it improves your HDL cholesterol, the good cholesterol. Like, instead of
Good
increasing the
cholesterol.
increases the good cholesterol, and there are studies, published studies, that's showing that high oleic beef, it improves the cholesterol profile in the blood of consumers, so they get more of the HDL cholesterol, which is the good cholesterol.
Right. And Pam and I are going to be doing some studies on the Wagyu beef sent in for the Triple Crown this year, actually continuing what I've been doing, but taking it to another level with his research. So please send in your meat to the Triple Crown, because you will get it evaluated to the nines. And we're even going to do a melting point of fat on
Yeah.
each entry. So that will be something that you're going to want that data as a breeder if you're interested in knowing your melting points, which also contribute to flavor. Which I want to bring up genetics, Pam. So I've been following with the Triple Crown. We're going, several years, over 6 years. I think it's 8 years of research on steaks that were sent in. And of course, we have the Siren Dam information on those steaks, and also the percentage, if it's 100% Wagyu, or if it's 50% a F1 or F2. We've really been following that. And I have seen certain sires that have consistently placed in the top five in the taste panel. And even though the taste panel isn't an analytical, it isn't scientific, it's subjective. It's We still are seeing that these sires are, producing a flavor profile, which led me to want to do studies on genetics and flavor profile. And when I talked to Dr. Kuchida in Japan, he told me that yes, genetics is very highly linked to flavor profile, melting point of fat, and the fatty acid enzymes you're talking about. So, in your research, have you found that certain genetics can produce elevated levels of these enzymes?
Yeah. So again, among the genetics, like the beef cattle breeds out there, Wagyu is known to have the like lowest melting point, which is more desirable because it gives you that perceived juiciness when you consume it, and also it gives you that buttery flavor. And then again, that goes back to the enzyme activity related to delta 9 desaturase enzyme. Um, but also, and then the relationship to melting point is that, like, oleic acid has a melting point of about 55 degree Fahrenheit. So, and the temperature of our mouth is between 97 to 99 degree Fahrenheit, so it's lower than the core body temperature. So when you have higher amount of that fat and oleic acid, it quickly melts in the mouth. So, having said that, too much oleic acid is not necessarily a good thing, because I mean, again, studies out of Japan that you referred to, they're showing there is an optimum level for the oleic acid that results in the optimum melting temperature for the beef fat. So for the beef fat, there is a wide range of melting point depending on the diet and breed. So it can range from around 78 all the way to 110 degree Fahrenheit. So if you get beef fat from grass-fed animals, it have higher melting point. It can go like up to 110 degree, which is much higher, which is higher than the temperature of our mouth. So it gives you that waxy mouth coating properties that is not desirable. So,
Right.
um, so that's the relationship between melting point. Again, the other fatty acid. We keep talking about oleic acid, but it's the other fatty acids and the total fat there also play a big role, like how much of saturated fatty acids we have in the meat. So yeah, there is a direct relationship between the enzyme activity, the fatty acid profile, that leads to the optimum melting point. And then that's something we are doing in my lab. So we can measure the melting point of the fat. So we have a machine. We take samples like of the fat, intramuscular fat, or fat cap from the from the back fat. Um, and we have these tiny capillaries that we fill it with we use liquid nitrogen, and we turn it into a powder, the fat, and then we fill these capillaries with the fat, and then we put it in the machine, and it heats it up at the specific rate, and then when the fat starts to melt, it records the temperature. So we do that objectively, and we see a direct correlation with the fatty acid profile, specifically the amount of oleic acid and the ratio of unsaturated fatty acids to saturated fatty acids. So there is a direct relationship. And as you said, we're going to do it as a part of the Triple Crown steak challenge. And we're going to look at the fatty acid profile. We're going to look at the complete fatty acid profile. We're gonna from the fatty acid profile, we can calculate some indices based on the fatty acid profile that tell you about the activity of the enzyme, the delta 9 desaturation enzyme in the animal that steak came from. So it's an indirect way of measuring the enzyme activity, which is a useful data for the producers.
And so we know from research that, and I'm going to say this because people ask me this all the time. So I'm going on a limb and I'm going to make this statement. Grain fed is more flavorful, and the fat is more buttery and melts in your mouth as opposed to grass fed. So I'm just going to get that out there and take a stand on that right now. So and the grain is what helps promote the marbling in the animal, and Wagyu have an exceptional boost of the enzyme for good fatty acids. Is that right, Pam? Have I
Yes,
nailed it
exactly. So
much there?
feeding high energy, high grain diet is a key to produce for the at least for the finishing period to producing a flavorful beef for what you mentioned, exactly what you mentioned, the marbling fat, like you get more marbling, higher marbling scores, and then also the composition of that marbling fat. So high grain diet stimulate the activity of the enzyme that we talked about, the delta 9 desaturation enzyme, um, that produces more of the oleic acid in the marbling fat. So it helps with two ways, not only increasing the marbling fat or intramuscular fat, but also it changes its composition, increasing more of the unsaturated fatty acids with the lower melting point, like oleic acid, and you get less of the saturated fatty acid. And it has um, implications for the nutrition and healthfulness of the beef, because um, usually animal fat are criticized for high saturated fatty acid content, um, but if you look at the beef, there is potential to increase the amount of oleic acid to up to 60%. So that's actually oleic acid is the predominant fatty acid in grain-fed beef. And despite what some consumers, the perception is, grass-fed is healthier than the grain-fed beef. There is no science-based evidence that yes, it slightly has higher omega-3 fatty acids, but in general, when you look at the whole profile, the grain-fed beef with the higher oleic acid, it's not only more flavorful, but also is potentially healthier than
Yes, it's
grass-fed.
healthier.
Yeah.
And we want to make that statement that the fatty acids in Wagyu beef are healthier. And we've done studies for a long time. And Payam and I are excited to do some studies here that are actually pioneers in research on Wagyu beef that haven't been done anywhere. And we are going to start that at UC Davis. So we'd love for your stakes to be a part of that. And while we're on this topic about feed, we did have a question about the effect on the flavor profile, which we've talked about that, but also specifically corn versus barley versus wheat.
Yeah, well, as I said, the type of like a grain in the diet and type of forage and the ratio could play a big role in the flavor and marbling development. When it comes, I don't know how common is feeding wheat, but I know there is a lot of studies done on barley grain and corn grain.
Uh huh.
So barley being more common, like when I did my postdoc in Canada, in Alberta. I was at the National Red Meat Research Center. Barley grain was the main source of grain there, and then in the US is mainly in corn grain for the most part. So when it comes to the type of grain, barley versus corn grain, corn has is more energy dense. It has more fat in it compared to barley grain. It results in more marbling and also higher oleic acid in the beef. Um, Having said that, depending on the time on feed, they are very close in terms of the flavor. The beef from barley grain fed animals tend to have like more white uh, fat, because there are less pigments in the barley grain compared to corn grain. Those carotenoids, and so you may see a slight difference in the color of fat with the barley fed animals. And then with the wheat, it is less energy dense than the other two types of grains, so you would expect less marbling. And I don't think in the terms of flavor it would can beat the barley or corn grain fed beef. That does tend to be marbled better, with a more desirable fatty acid profile with more oleic acid. So and also lower melting point. when you feed them for, especially for long period of time. Um,
Oh,
yeah.
he also asked a very interesting question. What adds sweetness to the final product? Is there a way to add sweetness um, to the final product? Now, the products I feed have, you know, a molasses in them, a kind of a sweet base. But what do you think, Pam?
So sweetness is not the same as a like sweet taste from sugar per se. Is like more uh, caramel like buttery pleasant flavor, and it's kind of it's an interaction of different factors like what you said, like molasses have a higher sugar content, but that doesn't necessarily you get more high sugar content in the meat. But there, when you grill the steak, there is a reaction called a Maillard reaction between the protein and in the meat we have slight amount of sugar in the form of glycogen, and then when you heat it up they interact, and they cause browning reaction, and which leads to that sweet buttery smooth flavor. But interestingly, having higher oleic acid is linked to the more sweet, perceived sweet buttery flavor. And then in grain-fed beef, generally is perceived as sweeter, and it flavor is sweeter than grass-fed beef. I think parts of it is also the fatty acid profile, also the volatile compounds. So when we during aging and also during cooking, some of the volatile compounds originate from that fat, including oleic acid, that can lead to that like the sweet flavor. So um, in general, I think I mean, there are some studies showing that having beet pulp or molasses in the diet, but there are not many studies showing, I mean, supporting that could help with the sweetness. But I think it's mainly the grain fed, uh, feeding grain for a longer period of time, and then generating more of that oleic acid can help with that, sweet flavor, sweetness to the final product. But again, I've seen some studies showing that adding things like molasses and beet pulp and also DDGS, distillers grain.
Oh yeah,
There has been report of that in the sensory panels that those would lead in the more like adding more sweetness to the final product. um, but again, there are limited studies done on those. So yeah, those are the factors that also cited. I think it has to do in part with how much of that glycogen stored in the tissue at the time of harvest as well.
right. And I wanted to discuss with you for just a minute. So when I read through the abstracts and research from Japan, um, did I understand it correctly that they did not say that the best flavor profile was from animals that had the highest amount of fat, but that it was kind of a few, like maybe two or three steps down from the top, intermuscular fat distribution in an animal. So did you because I think they rated like 1 to 8, and I think 6 and 7 or 6 was really the most desired.
That was an interesting finding because there was an like always we assume the higher oleic the better,
Right,
but based on that study from Japan, it shows that's not necessarily true. There is a relationship, but there is an optimum level of the oleic acid that leads to an overall pleasant, desirable flavor. And when I looked at that graph, that appeared to be between 55 to 60%. When
Yes.
the oleic acid went above 60%, actually the overall score reduced in terms of the overall flavor. I think that has to do with when you get too much of the unsaturated fatty acids. um, Unsaturated fatty acids, even oleic acid, it can result in being the meat more prone to oxidation and off flavor. So when you have too much of it, there is a higher chance of getting those that off flavor from oxidation. But also that you don't want your steak to be too oily and greasy. So there is always an optimum amount of the fat and the type of fat that you, and so that's something to keep in mind. The higher is not necessarily the oleic acid is the best flavor. Is you have to have the optimum level. I think that optimum level, I would say, is around 55% to 60%.
But now you're saying 55 to 60% in oleic acids, not in intermuscular fat, right?
Yes, I'm
Because
talking
that's a
about the oleic
really
acid.
high
Yes, yes,
IMF
that's a
score.
percentage of oleic acid I was referring to.
And when I read the Japanese papers that were published, I think that, and breeders will be happy to hear this, that the best flavor profiles were not the, uh, 58 and 60% IMF, which is from what I have seen in carcass grading, I've graded a lot of carcasses and seen a lot of carcasses, is that that's a very low level of percentage for breeders to attain that high an IMF score, and even in Japan, it's a misconception to think that they're producing 55 to 65% IMF every day. They're not.
Hmm.
Their A5 is probably only. The last time I talked to Kiego-san, I believe it was only about 30% of their all their animals harvested, which here even lower. So I think we're doing the right thing because
Yes.
the flavor profiles are not in the you know totally white veined marbled meat, but in a lower percentage. And I think probably the 45 to 48% range.
Yeah.
But we're gonna test that at UC
Yes, we're going to
Davis.
taste
Send
definitely.
your
We're
steaks
going to
in.
do it both objectively
Yeah.
with the assays we're going to do, but also sensory. So yeah, that's a great point, Desi, because there always should be a balance between the lean and fat, and because the protein in the lean part also contributes to the flavor. So when you lose that balance, the fat overwhelms, takes take over the whole flavor, and then you have less contribution of protein. So again, when it comes to intramuscular fat in extreme levels, it doesn't mean necessarily more flavorful. I think the beef that produced here in the US has a better balance of that lean to intramuscular fat that gives you the overall desirable flavor and taste.
So, this really excites me because in the testing I've done, I have found that the American beef tastes better than all of the samples that we've done from other countries. And I think that that results from exactly what you're saying, Payam, all of the different feeds and resources that we have here to feed cattle. So, I really believe that the USA, the American beef, is going to be the best in the world. American Wagyu, and we've done Angus profiles
Yeah.
too, and it's been great. So I can see the US leading the world in taste and flavor and just delicious, healthy beef, due to our great grain and forage. And the U.S. has amazing opportunities and different types of feed for cattle, and now that we can correlate it to the fatty acids and to the flavor profiles, I think if people really pay attention to what you're saying and our studies we're going to do, that we're, it's just going to get better and better.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, Desi. It's just because this is the years of experience and research on not just only productivity but also quality and
Quality.
sustainability. So, and then it goes back to the genetic management and feeding. Also, I would say processing plays a big role too. You create a high quality beef, having it processed in the advanced packing plants with the right packaging and the sorting and grading they're doing, and then they all contribute to a final product that as you said is one of the best
Yes, it is.
or
And
the best.
I brought the meat imaging camera from Japan here to the U.S. So if anybody's interested in grading your beef with a Japanese camera, you can get in touch with Meat Imaging USA and meatimaging.com and read all about the camera and see Dr. Kuchita grading beef. It's an amazing
And we're
camera.
going to be using it in the steak challenge in the triple crown, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
only this year, Dr. Cuchita's going to grade our steaks,
Oh, that's
Pam.
great.
So, I mean, we just have the best of the best taking place this year. You're going to want to send your steaks in and have all of these top researchers work on giving you the printout about your beef. And we're excited because we'll be using it in some of our correlations we're going to do in further studies that are actually pioneer studies that have never been done on Wagyu beef and Angus beef. So we're really excited about this year's Triple Crown. And
Yeah, that's going to be a very comprehensive assessment looking at different angles, like from like a marbling scores that with the camera you said,
yes,
uh, the full fatty acid profile, tenderness, and also doing the melting point, which is a new addition to that those objective assessments.
right. And so let me get back on track to some questions that were sent in.
Okay.
Um, and so um, one of the questions was, how do fatty acids affect the taste of Wagyu? And I think we went over that,
Yeah.
on the flavor profiles. And the next question someone sent in was, is there a correlation with the melting point and fatty acids and flavor profile?
Yeah, I think we kind of touched on that too. Yes, there is
Mhm.
a direct relationship because different fatty acids they have different melting points, and depending on the how many carbons there, how many double bonds. Um, and that leads to the composition of fatty acids dictates the final melting point of the product. So um, like when you have higher ratio of monounsaturated fatty acids, the main one being oleic, uh, to higher ratio of those to saturated fatty acids, you get in general a lower melting point, and that's because unsaturated fatty acid they melt faster. So and then so that's what we see a direct relationship between the ratio of we call it MUFA or monounsaturated fatty acid to saturated fatty acid to the melting point. The higher the ratio, the lower the melting point. So there is an
Mhm.
inverse relationship between the two. Um, with the beef, with the instrument that we have, even within the like we have a we did a survey in the packing plant, and we collected samples from 200 carcasses. Those were calf-fed Holsteins that we used for that studies, the bull calves that we got that finished in the Imperial Valley here in California, And then we had and then when we looked at the melting point, we see a wide range. Those animals were exact same uniform genetic background, and also they fed the same diet for the same duration, but still we see a wide range of melting point of the fat, which tells us there's still individual differences between the animals. And then that's partly, I think, not only genetic but also feeding behavior. Some animals have more like a sorting behavior. They sort specifically for the grain in the total mixed ration. The range that we have seen is like between like 68 all the way to 100-degree Fahrenheit. So it was a wide range of the melting point that we are seeing in these samples, which is amazing, and that shows there is potential to select for the animals that have based on the melting point. And then we have a straightforward method to measure the melting point of beef fat. And then, yes, and then we analyze the fatty acid profile of the same samples, and then we see a strong correlation between the melting point and the ratio of MUFA to saturated fatty acid ratio.
And we're gonna do, and I've done this over the years. Check the melting points against commercial cattle or other other breeds, and Wagyu do have lower melting points than other breeds of cattle. Um,
That's right.
so um, that's just how it is. But I have seen, and I will say this on behalf of the Angus entries that we received, is that the cattle, the Angus cattle, are their marbling potential has gone sky high compared to what it used to be when they would send in their samples. And I've actually seen, and I'm saying, I just tell the truth. I tell it like it is. I've actually seen Angus samples sent in to us that were DNA verified to be 100% Angus, actually up there with some of the F1, um, Wagyu. So I think generally the trend in American beef is that it's getting better and better. And I
Right.
think breeders are starting to take note of what it takes to produce exceptional beef. And I'm very excited about where this is going to go for the future of American beef. I'm just, I see it from a research standpoint and the testing over the years, and I've consistently see it go up. And Wagyu cattle, IMF scores have gone up consistently, and taste has just been out of this world. And I'm very excited to see that, happening, because I'm a pro American beef, American Wagyu. And so I just want to let people know we have the proof, we have
Yeah.
the papers that show it. And I'm just so proud of our breeders and our, conscientious Angus people too that are just trying. Before, and this, Pam, it was all about the pounds. That was all that mattered, was the pounds. It wasn't about the quality of the carcass. But I think when Wagyu came into the picture, people began to see, what quality carcasses are. And then when you have animals that are consistently above prime, I mean, that puts the pressure on the market. And
Correct.
Wagyu are consistently above prime, and more so than not. So that's something else I want people to know. It's very, there's high percentage of animals that are harvested that are Wagyu F1 included, that are below prime. I mean, low percentage that are below prime. The majority are above prime. So I think we're going to start seeing it, overall, all beef in the U.S. take a jump in quality. And so I'm very excited about that future.
Yeah, and then Desi, you talked about the Angus, and that's something we have observed as well. Like the when we compare the fatty acid profile of Angus versus Angus Holstein crosses, like the ones that are the crosses that are becoming more common, that you see in the feedlot. So we compared different breed composition, and then we found that the fatty acid profile, including the oleic acid of the Angus, for some of our the animals that we carcasses that we sampled and analyzed, it was very close to the American Wagyu in terms of the melting point and the quality of the fat. So I think the genetic of the Angus selecting for higher marbling, it also contributed to a more a better fatty acid profile and more oleic acid, and the higher ratio of the MUFA to saturated fatty acid ratio, and then eventually the quality, eating quality, and the melting point.
Yes, that's something that I really want everybody to pay attention to as well, because eating quality is very important. You know, when you're marketing your product, and so here's another reason to send your steaks in, and
Yes.
you know, I'm UC Davis has always been known to be so professional and top notch in their studies. And I'm so proud that we can work with UC Davis this year. And I know you've done a lot of work with Wagyu and Holstein or Jersey crosses too, just as well as other breeds using the dairy crosses. And so I have a question, Pam, just on the dairy breed. Do that, are they higher, like you said, in their fatty acids and flavor profiles than a regular commercial cattle?
So what we found that, like, we did a study comparing like Holsteins versus Angus and Angus Holstein crosses, and then we find that the Holstein had the lowest oleic acid content, like the less of and a higher melting point, and the Angus had the more desirable fatty acid profile oleic acid, and the crosses were in between.
Uh
And
huh.
I think so even the group of Angus that we had, they were yearling fed, so they were in the feedlot for a shorter period of time compared to those crosses, because crosses they directly go to feedlot. They can be in the feedlot for like up to 400 days, whereas in the traditional Angus, you have cow calf and backgrounding, and then they're going to spend around like I think 100 or 50 days in the feedlot. Despite shorter time in the feedlot, they had a more desirable fatty acid profile compared to those crosses and Holstein. So we see differences,
Mm-hmm.
um, because before we assumed those calf-fed animals like bull calves, Holsteins, and Angus Holstein crosses that spend longer time in the feedlot because of the system, production system. We assumed because of longer time on grain, we expected them to have a more oleic acid content. But we didn't find that to be true. All the Angus, despite less duration in the feedlot on a high grain diet, they had a slightly higher oleic acid. So yeah, we see definitely a breed impact on the like the fatty acid and melting point of the beef fat.
Yeah, that brings to mind when I was reading over the research papers from Japan. They have done studies on the difference between heifers
Oh
and
yeah.
steers, and we need to talk about that because I always heard that heifers were better, and I have not. I have not done any studies on that because well, people will, on our form that people send in, we do ask you if it's a steer or a
Yeah.
heifer, but I haven't really drawn the correlations. But they've done this research in Japan, and would you like to tell them, Payam, what that research actually told us?
Yeah. So I mean, right, you said that. I think there is a there's a like lack of enough study, like not enough studies have done in this area comparing heifers to steers. And then most of the data that we have, like in the research setting, we tend to use steers only. So but we know that heifers tend to marble better, I mean, uh, than steers. And then but the thing that we have less information on is the fatty acid profile. Do heifers have a more desirable fatty acid profile, like more oleic acid compared to steers? But I think that that study that you're referring to, the paper from Japan, they showed that yes, heifers, at least in that study, they had a slightly higher oleic acid compared to steers, which was interesting. I think that's something we should definitely collect more data on, and then see what's the effect of like heifers versus steers in terms of the overall eat fat quality.
Well, when I looked at that, and I want your, of course, professional opinion, when I looked at that and I did the numbers, it seemed like that the heifers, yes, they did score higher, but Pam, when I looked at the fatty acid profiles with those heifers, I wondered if it was even significant enough for a layperson that was eating a piece of meat to
Yeah.
even be able to tell the difference. And so I need your professional opinion.
Yeah, so again, the slight like even like some differences in numbers in terms of numerical differences, or even statistically differences by 2%, doesn't mean you can detect the difference when you are tasting the product. And I think even when we say heifers tend to marble better than steers, I think with the feeding and management, we it's easy, that gap can be closed easily. And then overall, when it comes to the consumers, I don't think it's easy to detect that differences between the heifers and steers. I think that the variation in feeding and management closes that gap. And I agree, even we see slight differences in the percentages, uh, that may not necessarily lead to something that you can detect when tasting the
and
product.
and and that's the point I want to make to our listeners, and people, uh, if it's not a significant difference. And here's something else we need to keep in mind when we think about heifers versus steers. If it's not a significant difference, I don't see it being advantageous, because steers, when we looked at the research on the growth rates, steers put on more weight than the
Yeah.
heifers did, so your yield was higher with steers. So you have to, all this stuff comes out, but you really have to weigh every part
Yes.
of the of what you're looking at in order to make a sound decision on your program. And so yes, they may in a small amount marble better statistically, but you also have to take into consideration the pounds, the size, and the steers were consistently a little bit higher in weight. So, and but I think the most important thing people need to pay attention to, which I don't know, if they are like I do, because we do the research, but you need to be logging your sires and dams, and you need to be measuring your subcutaneous fat, the outer layers of fat on your beef, and yeah, all of those things are heritable. Is that not right, Pam?
That is
All of that
correct. Yeah.
is heritable. Even the way that the marbling in the ribeye, uh, your coarse marbling versus your fine marbling, those are all heritable traits. And so it's very important that you want not just a great carcass, but you also want, when you cut on that 12th rib and you look at that ribeye, you want that visually pleasing to the consumer. And that there's a lot to it, and the list is extensive on do you want this or do you want that. But I will tell you, your genetics can determine your flavor profile, and we have seen that in the Triple Crown on several sires. And I get, I'll call people and say, look, you need to take that bull you have and breed him with a different female, and then send in all the different females and let's see if they all end up, in the top five. And we've actually had some that do, and I get so excited. I think I get more excited than the breeders do at
It's
learning
great.
what their genetics are producing. But knowledge, you can never have too much, and it's a great way to have a program that is really on top of things, and have meat quality that your customers are going to be calling you for that flavor, and they just can't get enough of it. And that's what we all want. So
Yeah.
that's why uh, fatty acids are so important, and that's why I wanted to share Payam with you, and let you know how we're into it this year for the Triple Crown.
Yeah, I appreciate it, Desi. I enjoyed the conversation. Also, I'll be looking forward to have you here in September when we receive those steaks for Triple Crown, and then, you know, I think you're going to bring your camera with you there for the grading, and I'm very
Yes.
excited to learn from you on that.
Yes, and UC Davis has a media team, so we're going to be able to, uh,
Yeah,
for the first time, to take actual videos, and it won't be my my cell phone photos. And we're going to be able to do a lot of advertising on your steaks and show people your beef. And of course, it's anonymous. We just assign you a number, but when we do get down to the nitty gritty, it's going to be like a beauty contest this year, right, Payam?
yes, we are
We're gonna do
excited about it. Yeah,
eliminations, and really get down to the top. I think we should do the top 10 this year,
yeah.
but
Well, yeah, and we're gonna make a video on the like and provide information on how what type of assessments and how we do it,
mhm.
and then and then you're going to be sharing the data with the people later on, I think it would be useful, very useful information for them because we are
Yes,
providing
and
different
this year,
uh,
and
yeah,
I apologize sometimes to our contestants. We can't get all the data we need because universities are very busy, and of course, I think our stuff is the most important in the world. But this year with Pam, he has we have a date we are going to be through, and we have a date you're going to get your data back, I think. And we're going to do another podcast and answer your questions from the Triple Crown, and Pam will be available to talk with us, and we are really going to get we're going to get down to business this year. And
yeah,
we also are going to have a podcast with uh, the woman that's in charge of the sensory part of the evaluation, and that's going to be very exciting too.
yes.
And having the video crew is going to really kick it up a notch this year. So, any studies that you've done that you're really excited about, or have we gone over just about everything?
I think that one of other things that we are doing and I'm very excited about is learning more about the health benefits of tallow as a cooking fat. You remember, that McDonald's used to fry, like the fries used to be fried in tallow, not with the vegetable oil. So that contributed to flavor. So I think now we realize, that the tallow can be a very healthy option for like the cooking oil because there is less oxidation products generated when you cook with tallow. And then the tallow from grain finished animals, they tend to have a higher healthier fatty acid profile. And we are doing studies looking at potential health benefits of tallow as a cooking oil in replacement for like a vegetable oil based, like soybean oil, or like a oil seed based cooking oil. So we are comparing how the oxidation products formed in this, because I look at tallow as a byproduct of beef production, right?
Right.
Um, and then we are feeding it to diabetic mice. We use them as a model to study, how the consuming beef fat can impact like things like diabetes, inflammation, and obesity. So I'm very
Oh,
excited about
that's
that part of research we're
amazing.
doing.
That's
Yes.
wonderful. Now, are you doing it on Wagyu tallow or regular beef tallow?
we
'Cause we got to
we
get some Wagyu tallow.
Yeah, if you can, we're gonna start the study in September. So if you can get us some Wagyu
I will get
fat,
you
I'm
Wagyu
happily do it
fat.
with that one. Yeah.
I will start sending it to you now.
Okay, perfect.
You can, yes, I want that study. That will be amazing to for Wagyu
Hmm.
breeders to be able to, sell that tallow and for it to be a very desirable, product on the market.
Yes. So we're looking for two different types of tallow, like the one that we get from the trimmings, like fat trimmings, and also is one specific tallow just from the kidney fat.
Kidney fat, okay.
Yeah, because that's kind of you can get a high quality tallow from that too, and we're going to use both of them in our studies. So if you can get us some beef tallow, we can, if you just send us the fat trimmings and kidney fat, we can render it and make our own tallows, and then we let you know about the outcome after we finish
Okay.
the mouse studies. Yeah,
Yeah, that would be that won't be hard to do because I know breeders will, that one thing about Wagyu breeders, they're very much when you ask them to help to send stuff in, they'll
yeah,
do it. They'll do it. So, yeah, this is amazing. This is great. Just
yeah,
one more wonderful thing in the pioneering world of Wagyu research. So, uh,
yeah, definitely.
that's great. Okay, Payam, for our last question I have here, are Wagyu truly more healthy for you?
Well, yes, in general, yes, and like we said, because of the fat composition, because you have less saturated fatty acid and more monounsaturated fatty acid in Wagyu, uh, they tend to have a more desirable like health outcomes, especially when it comes to the like blood cholesterol. Having said that, you can have beef from Angus like that with the right management and feeding. It have a very close or similar fat composition to that of Wagyu. So again, everything in moderation. I think uh, when it comes, that plays a big role, especially for ground beef, because fat is like the most popular ground beef is like with 20% fat in the US. So the composition of the fat there is very important. So if you have uh, ground beef from Wagyu grain fed, you get more of oleic acid, less saturated fatty acid per serving compared to the traditional breed. So in that regard, yes. But I think when we look at the beef, uh, it's not just the fat. You get a lot of high quality protein, B vitamins, zinc, iron, many other nutrients that that you can get it from beef, regardless of the breed. But it comes to fat, yes, I think in Wagyu, because of the higher healthy fats, it's in general considered a healthier fat. Yeah.
Well, that's a wonderful way to end our podcast. And we're so glad you tuned in, and we hope that you'll tune in for our next one and that you'll participate in the Triple Crown, or at least be a listener to see what we find out about the meat when we really put it through the ringer and do all the studies on it. And we'll be getting back in touch with you and keeping you posted on everything going on at UC Davis Animal Science. So we're going to take over in September. And please stay tuned and keep up. And we are glad you listened. And Payam, I've enjoyed talking with you so much. And I look forward to us getting together again.
Yeah, thank you, Desi. This was fun. We should do it again, and
No.
I look forward to the Triple Crown and have you here. And it's for the steak week. It should be fun.
Yeah, I can't wait. Well, thank you all, and we'll see you later. Bye.
Thank you.